with this novel, as I was thinking about it, I realized that it sort of demanded to be told from the points of view of the three different women. There's something about going from writing journalism to making that leap to fiction that feels a little bit terrifying. When we all graduated, she was like, "All right, now you're about to graduate, go out into the world. Do not try to write a novel."
Hello, and welcome to Literary Prospects. I'm Kelly Vick, and that was Nicola Harrison. Nicola's the author of 4 novels: Montauk, The Showgirl, Hotel Laguna, and, out just in time for summer 2026, The Island Club. Born and raised in England, Nicola moved with her family to Southern California when she was 14. She's a graduate of UCLA and received her MFA from Stony Brook University. Prior to writing novels, she worked as a fashion journalist in New York City, where she lived for 17 years. On today's episode, we're talking about joining the 5 a.m. Writers Club, working in multiple POVs, the boost Nicola got from Taylor Swift, and so much more. So let's get started. Nicola Harrison, thank you so much for joining today to discuss your transportive new novel, The Island Club. BookTrib says The Island Club is the perfect summer read, a delicious tale of female friendship, reinvention, and the unexpected ways our lives intersect. Booklist says Harrison excels at creating complex characters. These women struggle with loneliness and sexism, but Harrison focuses on their resilience and strength and the powerful bonds of female friendship. Author Kristen Harmel says, a story of the power of friendship, the defiance of societal expectations, and the finding of one's true self. And author Stephen Rowley says, no beach bag will be complete without this. So with that, welcome again, Nicola.
Much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you for being here. And what can you tell us about the Island Club? How do you describe the book?
Yeah, so the Island Club is set in on Balboa Island, which is a little sun-soaked enclave of Newport Beach in Southern California. It's about an hour south of Los Angeles. It takes place in the 1950s, and it looks like perfection from the outside, but inside, under the surface, there are three women whose lives are starting to unravel in very different ways. So we have Millie Kincaid, who's a young hassled mother of two who's struggling to keep her marriage together. And then we have Sylvia, who is sort of the society matriarch on the island. Everyone knows and loves her, and she'll do anything to protect her family's legacy. And then we have Adele, who's kind of living as a recluse on the island, and she's hiding out from a career-ending scandal that happened years earlier. So these three women are very different, different ages, different social standing. They don't know each other in the beginning of the book. But what they realize is that an unlikely friendship and the game of tennis might just be the one thing that can save them.
I love that description. What was the spark that got this story started
Yeah.
for you?
Um, so a couple of things. Well, first of all, I think it was tennis is what's got it for me to begin with because a couple in 2020 I moved from Manhattan, New York to Manhattan Beach, California, and I was like I think I was 40 or early 40s, and making new friends, moving to a new town and making new friends as an adult can kind of be tricky because people are already established, they've got their friends already, they've got their kids, they've got their social life, and it's like people don't really have time to let new people in sometimes.
Yeah.
And it was during the pandemic, which makes it even more tricky to make, new friends. So anyway, I was at the beach one day and I met these women and got chatting with them, and they had also just moved to the area, and they were like, "Hey, we're gonna take a group tennis lesson. You should join us." And I was like, "Okay." I mean, I didn't really have any interest in taking a tennis lesson. I'm not really a sporty person, and I was like, but I reluctantly agreed to take this lesson with them. Anyway, few months later, I'm totally hooked. I'm addicted to this sport, and I loved it. But what I found was even more surprising to me is that through this activity, I found an incredible group of women, an incredible community of women from all different walks of life. You know, we've got like a doctor and an accountant, and a PTA president, and we all sort of. I think what we discovered is that a lot of us, as you get older, you forget to carve out time for yourself. You get so busy with
Yeah.
your kids and and responsibilities, adult responsibilities, and all that invisible labor that women do. And you can kind of lose yourself in the shuffle. And so this activity allowed us to kind of put ourselves forward again and make time for ourselves. And you as you get older, you lose that sense of play. So we found that sense of play again. So I wanted to include an element of that in this book. That's certainly not what it's all about, but that's sort of was a spark that got it going for me.
How do you think learning to play tennis and getting into that, which is so heartening, by the way, because I always feel like I would love to learn how to play tennis, and I'm like, is it too late for me? Um, but how do you feel like that has affected your writing?
Yeah, well, it's
Besides
interesting.
giving you the idea for a great book.
Uh, well, it certainly makes me structure my time more with my writing, because you got some tennis practice in there during the day. But I don't know, one of the things I started doing, just because there are so many other things during the day that come up, you've got, you try to get your writing done, and then there's like emails you have to attend to, and all kinds of things. And now tennis. So I started with this book. I tried getting up early. Have you heard about the 5 a.m. club for writers?
Yes, I
Yeah.
have heard about this a little bit, but talk about what it is.
Well, I am not a morning person at all. I've always been a bit of a night owl, but I had heard about writers saying they're joining the 5 a.m. club, and I'm like, what is that? Anyway, it's like they get up at 5 and write before the rest of the house is up, and just it's sort of a few hours to yourself when everything else is quiet. And so I tried it, thinking there's no way this is going to be for me, but
Mhm.
I found it was actually quite magical. And like nobody needs me. The house is totally quiet. I don't have to make breakfast for anyone. And I had 2 hours from 5 to 7 where I just get so much done, so much writing done, and no interruptions. And I don't know, there's something about that early morning hour that my creativity came kind of alive, and so I'm now converted. I'm now a morning person.
So how do you do it? Because I that sounds wonderful, and I have tried setting my alarm, and then it's like, oh God, I just
I
I can't get up. How did you make yourself get out of bed? Do you have any tricks?
Well, not really any tricks, but I think it was the stage I was in my writing.
Mm.
I was really into the book, and it was, it's not the beginning where you're like trying things out to should I go in this direction, and does this voice sound right? No, I was probably about a third of the way in, and so I was at the point where I was wanting to write the next scene. I was really eager to get back into the book. I knew what I wanted, what was happening next, and so I think that helped because I wanted to do it. And so I just got up. I don't know. I was motivated to keep going with the book.
5 a.m. club. All right. I'm joining. You converted. Um, Balboa Island sounds like such a magical place. It's so wonderful to read about in the book. And I did not really know about Balboa Island before picking up the Island Club. So, can you talk about what drew you to writing about this particular spot for this book?
Yeah, yeah. So it's close to where I lived in my teenage years. So I knew it quite well already, and it already has this nostalgic feel to it when you go. It's
Mm.
like even today, it's like a very walkable. So the perimeter is like 2 miles, so you can walk the whole island. You get to it by taking this historic ferry over that's been around since 1919. And the main street has a saltwater taffy shop. It's got these frozen banana stands, two dueling frozen banana stands. It's a thing on Balboa Island. It's like a frozen banana that you dip in chocolate and then you roll it in peanuts or whatever other toppings. And there's
Right.
two that both claim to be the original that started in the 1940s, but no one actually knows. And so it's just already got this almost like a 1950s feel to it when you walk down on Main Street. And so I was drawn to that. I could already sort of envision my characters hanging out there. There's also a fun zone which has like a Ferris wheel and everything. So I could envision my characters in the 50s going on dates there or walking around. And um, so that I wanted to set it there because it just felt like that. And then once I went on a deep dive into the historical aspects of it, I learned that there was all this amazing history. And one of the things is that from the 1920s through to the 1950s, to the end of the 1950s, um, Balboa Island used to be the destination for college kids to go for spring break. I
Ah.
had no idea about this, but they called it Bal Week, and it's always the week before Easter. And they would just descend on the island, like thousands and thousands of them. People would rent out houses to them and rent out rooms, and so it was all these California college kids showing up, and they would, of course, it's all fueled by hormones and alcohol, but there was a big ballroom there called the Rendezvous Ballroom, and they would attract all the big bands of the era. So they would go dancing all night and bonfires on the beach, and there was a Miss Balboa bathing beauty contest. And so just all these things, I was like, this would be a great sort of backdrop of what's going on while these women are living in this town. There's all this craziness going on. So that's really why I decided to set it in the 50s on Balboa Island.
And one of your characters, Adele, is actually based on a real tennis champion from the 1920s. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yes. Her name is Suzanne Lenglen. And so Adele is loosely inspired by her because she certainly has a different ending in this book than the real tennis star. But yeah, Suzanne Lenglen was this French tennis star from the 1920s. And she was coached by her father, and she was just this incredible tennis star. She won all the championships, Wimbledon many times over. Um, and she crushed on the tennis court in a way that women never had before. She
Mm.
also refused to dress the way that women did play tennis in the 20s. They used to have to wear long dresses down to the ankle, covering the ankles, and bonnets. And how can you actually
Yeah.
like leap across the court like that? Of course you can't. And she was like, I am not wearing that. So she went to a designer, Jean Pateau, who was like he was it was Coco Chanel and Jean Pateau. Those were like the two French big designers at the time. And so she went to him. Her father got her in, and he designed the tennis skirt that we all know today for her. So she basically introduced the tennis skirt that we all know. Of course, then it was down to her knees, and it was like a scandal. She's showing her knees, but it was a big improvement from what they were previously wearing. And she also was trained basically to play like a man. Previously, women were trained to play, very dainty and
Mm.
so she would leap across the court. She would, run things down. She would grunt if she needed to, like whatever she needed to. She basically was the first woman to play like a man, and she just took off. But she was really crippled by this need to like please her father,
Mm.
and so she had real sort of confidence issues. Even though she would go out there and she would show up to the courts in full makeup and a mink coat and all this jewelry, and then she would just go on and play. So she was a real personality, but privately she had a lot of issues in her in confidence that kind of crippled her in many ways.
She sounded, I feel like now I need to look her up and read a whole book about her as well. I feel crazy that I didn't know about her. The research for this must have been a lot of fun. I understand that you looked up some magazines from the 1950s as part of your research as well. Is that right?
Yes, I did. You've done your research too. I do. I tend to do that whenever I'm writing a novel that's set in a new decade, just to really get a sense of the time period and what was going on. And women's magazines will really tell you what was going on and what women were thinking about and everything. So I bought a bunch of magazines from eBay, and Ladies' Home Journal, Good Housekeeping, 17, all those magazines, and I just read through them, and they're so fascinating. I mean, the articles are very interesting, but the advertisements as well. Everything is geared towards women cleaning their house, having a good meal on the table for when their husband gets home, looking beautiful doing it, and it's just all about domesticity and like and being happy about it. And if you're not happy about it, there's a pill for that, you know. And that'll just allow, take one of these pills and you'll have a little spring in your step as you're vacuuming, and then you'll be energetic with a gin and tonic in hand when your husband gets home from work. And it's just that's all what it was about. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's what these women were being fed all the time. That was almost like propaganda.
Hmm.
So it was just very interesting to think, that was not that long ago. Um, I mean, we've come so far, and yet we haven't.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah. Have we really?
um, it was just interesting. I mean, there was one article I read that was called "How to Be a Woman." It said, it said, what other career or what other profession can you have where you can have the joy of making a deliciously home cooked meal and having your house ready, and then allowing your husband to be the rested lord of his manor when he comes home. I was like, oh my gosh. So of course all of that weaves its way into the novel, and you know these women. And one of my characters, Millie, is sort of the traditional housewife, and that's it, she wanted that role. She was training for that role most of her life. She took the marital arts class in college, and she read all these magazines, and so she feels like she has trained for this, and so she's almost like grieving this life that she wanted when things don't work out exactly as she planned.
Not quite. Not quite exactly as planned. What is your process like? We were sort of talking about the research. Do you start out with a lot of research when you get that first spark of an idea and then outline, or what does it look like for you?
So for me, it starts out with, like you said, a spark of an idea, and then I sort of go on a deep dive down the rabbit hole
Mhm.
to just learn as much as I can about the place and the time period. And so I started out at the Newport Beach Library. They had a great local history section, and I just read everything I can get my hands on, memoirs, newspaper articles. Those books where they show, I think it's like postcards, it's like now and then, and they show how things looked
Mm.
now and then. I just read everything I can get my hands on. I do research for about, I would say about 2 months before I even attempt to put a word down on the page. And I like to learn way more than I need to know.
Mm.
Um, a lot of like barely, I would say like 5% of this research ends up in the book, but I have to have a good you know, overall picture of the time period and of the place in order to like be able to write it in a way that feels authentic.
Yeah.
Um, and there was another, oh yeah, the Balboa Island Historical Society. They had done an oral research, an oral history project where they had interviewed many locals who had grown up on the island or who spent their summers there, and it's like these older people just telling stories. And so I listened to a bunch of those because that's those little details are sometimes things that you can't find in books. Um, and so I just take notes on all of that, and then at some point certain things start to bubble to the surface, kind of like, okay, this feels important, this less important. And, things start to come to the surface, and you're like, okay, now I have a sense of it. And so then I start plotting, loosely plotting. I would say, people ask if you're like a plotter or a pantser,
Yeah.
fly by the seat of your pants. What are you? What are you?
I wish that I was a plotter, but so far I am a rather hopeless pantser.
I know. I'm the same way. I'd say I'm somewhere in the middle. Like I like to loosely plot out. I generally know where I want things to start, kind of in the direction that we're going, and I usually know what the ending's going to be, which is weird. Um, but I don't necessarily know how we're going to get there or what will happen along the way. And I don't know this, although it seems very organized and civilized to have it all planned out. There's something about not having it too planned out that I think allows for a lot of creativity, and it allows for things to happen that you maybe weren't expecting, or characters to come in that you think are just going to sort of come in and buy an apple and then walk out the door, and they end up having a big personality, and they click with your characters, and they end up sticking around. So I think if I had it too strictly outlined, those little surprises wouldn't be able to happen. So, I think there's some value to being a bit of a hot mess while we're writing.
So do you get like that first draft down and then go back and start? How many revisions do you typically go through, or has it changed through the books?
I would say I do a lot of editing as I go, and rewriting and reworking as I go. So I would say by the time I get to the end, it's usually pretty solid. I mean, there's definitely then revisions and then you get feedback and things change and shift. I don't know how many revisions I go through, but there's certainly a lot of
Yeah.
it. But I wouldn't say at least with the book I've written, this is my fourth book. I wouldn't say that I've ever gotten to the end and then had to do a total rewrite. That hasn't happened so far, and I think that's because I am editing and revising as I go.
Did you go back and kind of look at what you did the day before you move on to write something fresh, or what is that?
Yeah, yeah. I usually read through what I've written the day before, and then just get back into that world, and then
Mhm.
head off again. I also stop at several points along the way, maybe like a third of the way in, halfway through, and I'll start to say, okay, this is what's happening, and then I'll start to plot out a little bit further,
Mhm.
so I kind of know what beats I want to hit and what kind of what's going to happen, but I won't plan it all the way out to the end. So it's sort of like the car driving in fog. You can see a little further in front of you, but you can't see all the way.
You can't see the whole way. Well, you mentioned this is your fourth novel. The first three were written in first person POV, right, with a single point of view. And this one we have three POVs, and
Yeah.
we're in a close third person. So, what made you decide to jump from that single narrator, single point of view to the three?
Well, I was a little scared to do it, I have to say, because I've written three books with a single point of view, a single narrator all the way through, like you said, and I think I got to the point where I was like, oh, this is what I know how to do. I can do this well.
Mhm.
But with this novel, as I was thinking about it, I realized that it sort of demanded to be told from the points of view of the three different women. So we have alternating chapters with Millie, Sylvia, and Adele. Um, because I realized that here they are in this close knit community with these different things going on, and we needed to be able to see these different situations from the different women's perspectives. Because I think, you know, depending on I've seen this in my own life and with my own friendships, is depending on what's going on in your life or in your marriage or in your home, you can experience the same situation very differently from the way somebody else is experiencing it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we don't always know what's going on behind closed doors. Sometimes your best friend, you think oh, they have a great marriage, but you actually have no idea
Mhm.
what's really going on back there. Um, I really wanted to be able to look at these different situations from their different points of view and really inhabit the mind of each of these characters. And it was really fun. I loved writing this way. It was like refreshing for me to be able to write from Millie's perspective, and then like a few days later, just get into Adele's head. And Adele
Mhm.
feels very, very different from Millie. But so it kind of kept it really fun and exciting for me while I was writing it. So
Were
hopefully that's
you,
the reader.
yes, were you going back and forth as you were writing? So you were alternating perspectives throughout your writing process instead of writing one all the way through and then going back to.
I did. I did. I basically wrote it the way you read it. Like
Yeah.
I would write Lily's section and then Adele's section and then Sylvia. And I mean, things definitely got shifted around, but I wrote pretty much chronologically like that. And it's interesting because before I wrote this way, any authors who wrote from multiple perspectives, I'd ask them, I'd be like, how did you do it? Do you write one character all the way through her whole story and then chop it up into chapters and write the other character? And some people do it that way, and some people write they write one point of view and then the other point of view and the other point of view. So I think like Sarah Penner, who wrote The Lost Apothecary, she
Hmm.
wrote one character all the way through her whole story, almost like a mini book, and then she writes the other one almost like a mini book, and then she weaves them in to different chapters. that just didn't feel right to me for this book. It just felt right to write Millie's perspective, and then Sylvia sort of jumps in right where Millie left off, and like one's pulling into the parking lot, one's pulling out, and so it felt really natural to me to write that way. And so like Fiona Davis, for example, another historical fiction author, she writes from multiple points of view and multiple timelines, and so she does it the way that I think I did it, going from character to character. So there's different ways, different ways to do it.
It does feel like it works really beautifully when reading The Island Club, this idea of sort of looking at one happening from the different perspectives, right?
Yes.
And so you can see how if you're thinking, well, I'm going to think about this incident or this, day and think about what was going on in Millie's head, what was going on in Adele's head, right? What's going on in Silly's head.
Yes.
What normally you were in first person before. This is a close third, which is very similar, but I wondered if it felt different to you doing the close third versus a first person.
Yeah, that's interesting. It is kind of similar. I think you're still feeling all those emotions that the character's going through and everything. So it just feels similar to first person. It didn't feel that different to me, actually. Yeah.
What draws you to writing historical summer fiction?
Um, well, I live in a beach town. I live in Manhattan Beach, and so that's, you know, I love living here. So that really put, I'm in the right mindset already. I
Yeah.
think the historical aspect, it's funny when I was writing my first novel, Montauk. Um, I was in a writing workshop and I started writing the story. And then I kept wanting to go back and kind of write the grandmother's story. So in these flashbacks,
Mm.
and my writing group were like, hey, you want to write this grandmother's story? Why don't you just write that story? And I was like, well, that would make it, then I would have to set it in the 30s. And they're like, yeah, so set it in the 30s. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. Um, but it's funny when I look back on it. Um, when I look back at the books that I was reading at that time, I was always gravitating towards reading historical fiction. So I think my mind was already there. Also, I was coming from a journalistic background. I was a fashion journalist in New York for many years. And, that kind of writing is, all based in fact who, what, when,
Mhm.
where, why. And my mind was trained to write that way. And so I think when I started um, writing historical fiction, it just really worked for my brain. There's something about going from writing journalism, articles to nonfiction to write to then making that leap to fiction that feels a little bit terrifying. You're like,
Mhm.
am I allowed to just make things up? But grounding it in some historical facts, in some, historical background, things that really happened, it just allows me to ground my story that way. And it felt I don't know, somehow liberating to ground it in historical fact and then build a fictional story around that. So it just kind of worked, putting those two worlds together.
Have you always been a writer?
I've always certainly been leaning that way. Um, when I was younger, I grew up in England, and I lived down the street from a children's book author. Sorry, I lived down the street from a children's book author. Her name was Margaret Greaves, and she was so welcoming and so nice. And she used to let me go over to her house and bring little stories that I'd written and little poems. And then I remember taking her a short story one time and she read it and she's like, well, this is very good. I think you should hold off on sending it out to publishers right now because you're 9. So just work on your craft. But there was something about meeting and knowing a real life author at a very young age that I think kind of shaped me and allowed me to think like, oh wow, I could maybe do that. And so all throughout school, I gravitated towards taking English and creative writing classes, and I went to UCLA and studied English and creative writing. And there, I had a college professor, one of my mentors. Actually, she was Carolyn C., who is the mother of Lisa C., the author.
Mhm,
And so she was fantastic. And when we all graduated, she was like, all right, now you're about to graduate, go out into the world. Do not try to write a novel. And she was like, "You have nothing to say yet. You have no life experience. You've got to get out there and have a job, have a relationship, go through a breakup, get some real life experience under your belt." And she's like, "And then you might have something to say." So I took that to heart and moved to New York. And that's when I started working in magazines and journalism. Um, and then I didn't publish my first book until I was 40. So it was, it was, it was a process to get there, but I always knew I wanted to write. And so I was, the journalism, I was like, well, I'm writing, just not
Mhm.
writing a novel yet. But even when I was doing that as my day job, I was always chipping away at a novel on the side or taking creative writing classes.
So, what was the road to publication like for you? How did you get that first novel
Yeah.
published?
Yeah. So I did go back to school and I got my MFA in creative writing at Stony Brook University. And I don't think that you really need an MFA to write a novel, but it allowed me to just, have some focused time on working on my craft and meeting other writers and everything. And so after that, um, the writing workshop that I mentioned, I joined that, and then I started working on my first book, Montauk, and it took me many years to write because I had no deadline, no agent or anything. No one was expecting anything of me. So I think that book took me 4 years to write. And
Mhm.
then when I was done, you have to get an agent first. So I was like, well, which books have I read recently that I liked? And let me look up who that agent is. And so one of the books I had just read was Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. So I looked up who her agent was, and it was Stephanie Roston. So I reached out to her, and many others, but Stephanie ended up being my becoming my agent. Um, so, and that happened pretty quickly, actually, surprisingly, because I'd heard so many horror stories about all the rejection letters and everything, but we just clicked right away. And so she became my agent, and then she found me my publisher, which was St. Martin's Press.
Once you signed with Stephanie and got the agent, how long did the whole signing with St. Martin's Press thing take? Was that really quick, or what was that like?
It, oh, okay. It's a while now. I have to think about this. I think it was 4th of July weekend, which is the worst time that I sent it out to agents.
Huh?
I can't even believe that Stephanie got back to me because like she wasn't even in the office, but she sent me an email on 4th of, I think I sent it out the Friday or the Thursday before 4th of July weekend. And she sent me an email over the weekend and was like, I'm reading this and I love it. I'm going to get back to you next week. So,
Wow, Nicola, that's great.
but I mean, that I would give people advice not to do that, not to send out your manuscript right before a holiday weekend, because most people,
Everyone send your queries out on a holiday.
maybe she had time. Maybe that's what she had some free time to actually sit and read at the beach. Who knows? Um, but then But then I think we waited the whole summer did nothing because publishing kind of shuts down over the
Hmm.
summer. Um, so she suggested waiting. So I was like, oh my gosh, but I want to send it. I want to find out who my editor is going to be. But we waited the whole summer. So I think it was September when she actually started sending it out to editors, and then probably a couple months after that was when I signed with St. Martin's Press, and then it was like December or something, and it takes about a year for the book to come out after you sign with a publisher. By the time they come up with the cover and do all the copy editing and everything, but that was like December, and so they didn't want my book to come out then. They wanted it to come out in the summer, so I had to wait another year and a half for the book to actually come out, and so it felt so painfully long. But it did finally come out in 2019. I
And then your second book came out in 2020, right?
think it was
Or 2021?
2021.
Okay, it was during COVID,
Yeah.
and you've said that at first the sales, of course, as all were during COVID, were you felt a little disappointed with, but then you got a little boost from
Yeah.
Taylor Swift. Can you talk about that?
Yes. Thank you, Taylor Swift. Yeah, it was 2021, so we were still, feeling the pain of COVID, everything. People weren't really going to the bookstores and everything, so it was a little rough. But yeah, last year, so my book is called The Showgirl, my second book, and of course last year was it just last year? Taylor Swift came out with a new album, The Life of a Showgirl. And so all of a sudden, my book's getting all this love on social media, saying these are the books you should read while you're waiting for her album to come out. Um, and then I think I did an article for Katie Couric Media, talking about all the things that you should read. And so yeah, just got a lot of love and a nice little boost in sales. And it's funny because I mean that album is very different, but the actual song that's called The Life of the Showgirl, it is kind of similar to my story, Life of a Showgirl. It's about a 1920s showgirl who's, working really hard to make things work. And so the story is kind of similar there. So it was fun to do that. I was waiting to get, I did mail her a book. And I was like, maybe, just maybe she'll be reading it one day and someone will snap a picture, but that hasn't happened yet.
Well, not too late. Not too late if Taylor Swift is listening. What do you know now that you wish you had known before you published your first novel, Montauk?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I had no idea sort of how much fun it would be to get out and meet readers. Uh,
Mm.
I just got back from a book tour, for a 2 week book tour for the Island Club, where I was zigzagging all across the country, and quite hectic and quite exhausting. But there's something about, you spend all this time by yourself writing this novel. Writing is a very solitary pursuit. For me, I'm at home writing it, often in my, sweatpants or pajamas, with all of these characters working in your head. And so it's really nice then to, when the book comes out, to be able to get out there and talk about it and to connect with other readers and to hear their stories. It's funny how a lot of people are like, "Oh my gosh, my grandma grew up on Balboa Island," or you know, some sort of story from the 1950s. And there was one woman that I met who told me that her entire sorority went down to Balboa Island and did that spring break week. And so she was telling me all about that, and she shared pictures with me. So I had all these cute pictures of her and her sorority sisters in their 1950s swimsuits. And so that was just really fun to like make those connections of things that you've been writing about and bringing to life, and then hearing about real stories. So I would say that's like a very pleasant little surprise that came out of writing.
Is there a way that you kind of keep yourself from burning out during these book tours? I'm sure it's exhausting
It-
as well as fun, but
yeah,
it's a lot, I'm sure.
yeah. So my mom comes with me, which is kind of fun. Yeah. Um,
Cool.
so this is the third time that she's come with me, and it really, really helps to have some company because some of it is flying, a lot of short little flights,
Mhm.
but a lot of it is, renting a car and driving 3 hours because it's faster just to do that than to try to go to the airport and fly. Um, so a lot of like 3.5 hour drives through middle America. And it really helps to have some company. And also, you do the events and then you're back in your hotel room and eating a, salad from from the bar or whatever. It's just really nice to have someone there that you can talk to and everything. So that kind of has kept me sane.
And you have also started a writing group that seasoned and new writers can join, right?
Yes, yes, that is right. This is a new development. Yeah, I'm doing that on Zoom, um, because it's really fun and really helpful, I think, to when you're writing a novel. I know this has been the case for me when you're writing, working on a manuscript, to have that weekly check-in with people and share pages. For one thing, it holds you accountable. It that every week you've got to share, up to 7 pages, and it should be something. It doesn't have to be perfect by any stretch, but it should be something that you feel, okay, relatively proud of, and you're ready to read out loud. And just getting that feedback from other writers it helps you sort of not go down a rabbit hole. So I mean, I've been in a workshop before where people are like, I don't believe that the character would do that. And I'm like, well, why not? And they're like, because whatever. And it helps you. It's like, okay, it helps you reel it in before you write, 200 pages in the wrong direction. Um, so I think the accountability and the camaraderie, it really can help you go from just taking a spark of an idea to actually completing a manuscript. So yeah, I'm excited to be doing that now. So I'm offering that on Zoom and one in person here in Manhattan Beach.
If people want to look into that, they can find information on your website.
Yeah, on my website. So it's just nicolaharrison.com and there's a little tab that says workshops.
Very cool. What is your best or favorite piece of advice for aspiring authors?
Well, this kind of ties into what you just asked me about. I would say my best advice is really to find either a writing workshop or a writing class, or even just a group of like-minded people who are writing, um, because just purely for that accountability and just like that motivation to just keep going. I think it can be kind of a lonely pursuit if you're just trying to do it by yourself. And honestly, regular people who are not writing, they don't really want to hear about it until you're done. It's sort of like talking about your dreams, you know? Like people don't like to hear about your dreams either. And so unless they're a writer, I think it's hard to connect with people. So you end up you feeling pretty lonely just doing it by yourself. So I guess my advice would be to find a group or a writing workshop like mine.
Yes. And now we have a workshop that everyone can join. We have a traditional last question on this podcast, and it is when the Island Club is made into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, maybe La Isla Bonita by Madonna.
Ooh, I thought you were going to go with something 50s inspired, but I like
No.
that.
Well, it could be. It could be. Probably 50s is a bit more appropriate, but that's just kind of a fun one that I've been playing in my head while I've been writing.
Oh, I love it. I love it. That's great. Nicola Harrison, thank you so, so much for joining today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.